if we were in an academic forum at the university, I would probably need a half an hour to introduce our next speakers. But this is a different forum, very dynamic. I'll just use a quote that Professor Manuel Castel said, that probably we are going to have two of the finest urban thinkers of today at this room. And that probably will suffice. But I need to say something more too. I will introduce both speakers at the same time. Professor Saskia Sassen, who's our first guest, Professor of Sociology from Columbia University, and also Chair of the Committee on Global Thought, an expert on cities, global economy, migrations, globalization, and also the originator and coiner of the term global city. And I would also, as Julian has showed his book, I would also like to market Professor Sassen's book, Expulsions, Harvard University Press, Brutality and Complexity in the Global Economy. The next speaker is Professor Richard Sennett, the co-chair of Habitat 3, the building of new charter of Athens. I won't say more on that. Professor of Humanities at NYU, Professor of Sociology at LSE, Centennial, I think. Director of Teatro Mundi, an extremely exciting assemblage of artists, academics in different European cities. And also the distinguished visiting scholar at Cambridge University. I'm also advertising a book for you too, the one, I would say, Together, Rituals, Pleasures, and Politics of Cooperation. But these two fine academics have also written numerous books, received numerous awards, so it's just to Google, and I think you can get everything out of that. So I have the greatest pleasure to invite Professor Saskia Sassen.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for that nice introduction. And Julian, it was a wonderful talk. I was here to hear it. The title of my talk, Who Owns the City, is clearly a very ambiguous concept. When you think about it, over time, our crowded cities may have had a lot of major figures owning, like kings and queens, owning big parts of the city, and yet the city can never be completely theirs. Today we are beginning to see new trends that I find profoundly disturbing, that are disrupting that historical tendency of a big, enormously diverse city to sort of outlive formal systems of power, governments, kingdoms, multinational corporations. None of them has lasted forever. The ones that have lasted the longest are our nice big cities. Further, if you think of Baghdad, old Baghdad versus today's Baghdad, or the Baghdad that came after the invasion by the Americans, or you think of Jerusalem, old Jerusalem, a capacity to mix extraordinarily, potentially conflictive actors. But commerce and the civic tend to intermediate. And again, I think that today, some of our big cities are at risk of losing that. So I want to first present some data about this new project of mine that I call Who Owns the City. And then I want to end on two more positive pictures, which have to do with, on the one hand, given the environmental crises, the importance of cities. Every surface in a city should be working with the environment. Bacteria, algae, mushrooms are sort of the queens of that effort. I'm working a lot with biologists and material science people, extraordinary possibilities, so that what is now a negative can get recoded as a positive. And then finally, the ways in which we can use digital technology to make present not just the people, but also the knowledges of those who are not considered knowledge carriers. Disadvantaged, low-income workers, but also the grandmothers and the children and the homeless people. A project that I'm doing that I call open sourcing the neighborhood. Now, it is clear, I think, to everybody that I'm simply not going to get to all of it, but I am an optimist, and so I throw myself like a little savage into it all. and then I have to interrupt brutally because, after all, the next speaker is my husband, and you know. So one first issue, as you can see from that title, I'm very interested in understanding how enormously powerful sectors, finance is one of them. Moreover, a sector that requires extraordinarily complex forms of knowledge. The math of high finance is not microeconomics, that's like kindergarten. It is algorithmic math. So really brilliant minds at the service of whatever these financiers. And so I'm interested in understanding, does a sector like that actually manage to insert itself in modest urban space? Yes, it does. I hope by now you have read the mechanisms. This is not, I'm just illustrating one of these modalities that are really unsettling urban terrain, urban ground, you know, the city, in this picture that I gave you at the beginning. So the point here is how to extract yet another item, in this case, very modest households, to make it work for the high finance circuit, an asset-backed security. 15 million contracts were extracted from 15 million households. Most of them have lost their homes. It is a short, brutal story that lasted about 7 years. It's now crawled into Europe. Here are some of the results. Now, this is yearly. Foreclosure is a notice, but according to the central bank, the Fed in the United States, 14.4 million actually have been thrown out because it was nothing to do with getting homes. So just again, millions. Here we're talking millions of households. And here goes on, first half of 2014, another over 500,000. And then the story sort of ends because these contracts were such, sign, all they wanted was a signature. Sign. And you don't have to pay anything for the next 5, even 10 years. That was the deceit. Anyhow, I don't want to get into the details. Now, Europe thinks that it doesn't have this problem. Well, that brilliant instrument, which has been declared illegal in the United States, has entered Europe. The main victim at this point are Latvia, which is not on this, and Hungary. Hungary, 1 million households out. And what I want, and by the way, Germany, which we all think is, of course, an admirable economy, has an invisible history. These are, again, these are households. It could be one person, often they are apartment buildings, could be 4 or 5. Every year, Hungary has now, if we carry on with the data, 1 million households out. Hungary is a small country. Latvia, 365,000. So, and us, and by the way, I should end here. Nice countries like Denmark, I think I don't have Stockholm on here, I should. But they're also having, the numbers are much smaller, but it is like a little worm that crawls into these situations. Now, the result of all of this, especially in the United States, the most dramatic case, is emptied, I-E-D, emptied land, urban land. So, inventing an urban labor market, an urban land market. So one of them, I want to go very quickly, is the super prime housing market, the opposite of the subprime. This is an invented market. It's what, you know, the Nobel Prize winner who talked about matching markets, who got his Nobel for an economist. This is what that is. Matching markets, organized markets, minimum. Those minimums that you see there, the basic price is over 100 million. But they're minimums. By doing those minimums, they can escalate prices. So these properties often encompass more than your typical, say, if you think of a city like London, your little brownstone, you know, very nice, etc. So I'm moving very quickly because I assume that it's quite elementary. Here is more of this. The nationalities change. Look at Dubai. Dubai is truly international in many ways. And then, etc. I love this one. Shanghai, pretty low minimum price. These are all minimum prices I want to include. Look at the world wants to buy in Shanghai. Look at Hong Kong, 15.4, main buyers, mainland Chinese. I find that very interesting. I've noticed that I will say this and nobody seems to react to this. Because, you know, you understand what we're talking about, right? The mainland Chinese are probably coming from Shanghai. The Chinese themselves are buying super in Hong Kong. The rest of the world is buying in Shanghai. Now, this is the latest data. I work on a data set of 100 cities that are the top recipients of investment. This is only investment in properties. This is not investment in, say, a development, you know, an empty site that you're going to develop. This is 1 year. This is a story that takes off in 2008, when the crisis really hits. As you can see, New York likes to be number one, and by God, it is number one right now here. 55 billion, etc. London, and then you see like Chicago, you know, the list of cities is quite extraordinary. Stockholm is on there too, by the way, not in this top 10. If I showed the 100, you know, I would have to wrap it around. That would be beautiful, actually, wrap it around the room. Now, so here you get a sense of the distribution, and here you have it when it's foreign investment, and there London is the main. Now, many people say that this is a kind of gentrification. This is shorthand for all kinds of things I don't need to elaborate on. I think that it is more than gentrification. And let me give you an example that some of you probably know in London. The main buyers, there are critical big buyers. And so the Qatari royals are one family that has bought there. They now own more of central London than the Queen of England. Now, the Queen of England is not the main owner of central London, but still, that's and now the Qataris are buying, maybe they already executed the operation Canary Wharf, you know, which is like a little city. When you have that kind of juxtaposition, you have something else that is not gentrification. I don't think we have a word for it. Now, I am interested in this story because I think that what we are seeing, on the one hand, is the emptying of urban space, all those people evicted. So the sites are not the same, and I don't want to make too much, you know. And on the other hand, we have all this buying up. And one form that the buying takes up, for instance, in London, they'll buy 3, a given family might buy 3, or a given firm, 3 brownstones, keep the fronts, the facades, because they're you know, you cannot change that, but hollow it all out and have one entity, this is especially dramatic with homes, live in there, which leads to a sort of de-urbanizing. On the other hand, if the big corporates that are buying, they'll add to the density of the city, but they are actually also de-urbanizing because those become mega projects that are private. And so urban tissue, little streets, little this, little that, neutralized, out. Now, one might then ask, why does this matter? Why does it matter that you have, you know, you have a beautiful, big, mega project, fancy architect, lots of density, etc. You have eliminated old little streets, old little offices, old little buildings, old little squares. Why does it matter? No, those who think that density marks city would say it doesn't matter. But density does not mark city. An office park is extremely dense, but it is not a city. It is not a place like Julian was describing, you know, where all these possibilities happen. And for me, when I think bottom, you know, ground level, why does it matter? I cannot help but go back into histories, many histories of cities, and say the city has long been complex but incomplete, and in that mixity of complexity and incompleteness lies the possibility of those without power to make a history, make a culture, make an economy. Think of immigrant communities today, for instance. And so when you have these big mega projects that eliminate tissue, they actually rigidify the city. Chances are also that the rate of obsolescence of those mega projects, because they're propped up with all kinds of technologies, are also increasing. So to me, this is a very ambiguous situation. Now, I have a whole bunch of other things that sort of make me think, besides what I just described, that make me think that we are probably entering a sort of new systemics. And I just wanted to, this is not urban stuff per se, but I wanted to show some of these slides. Now, look what is interesting here. So this is corporate profits after tax. This is the United States. So here comes, they're under $1 billion here. It props up, 1990, it begins to rise. It's the global era. They reach this. Then comes the crisis, which for these sectors lasted about 2 hours. I exaggerate, 2 years. This is what matters. After that, it's higher. Even as you have people losing jobs, middle class is getting impoverished, millions of homes getting lost, right? And this is even more striking. This is assets. Here it lasts about half an hour, the crisis, not more. And that more, what strikes you is these divergent trends. Impoverished middle classes, which has become sort of a stand-in for all kinds of other issues. And then on the other hand, this increase. And look at this. This is ratio of 1% wealth to median wealth. It bobbles up, and then poof, after the crisis, it goes up. Why? Because those who had achieved a certain amount of wealth have fallen. The United States is an extreme case, but it's signal. I've done this for Germany, I've done it for other countries. This is a trend. Somebody has to tell me how much time I have. Are you aware? 5 minutes, okay, very good. I'm so bad with time. Now, there is yet another issue that is going to affect the whole question of cities and urbanity, and that is what we might call land grabs. So, as some of you know, I work always the global south and the global north. And so, here are some figures. This is also a story that, this is an old history clearly, but there is a whole new phase that begins with the crisis. In 2006, when this cycle begins, for about a period of 6 months, the main buyers of land in sub-Saharan Africa were hedge funds. These are financial firms, not because they were going to become farmers, clearly. There was something else. And again, this question of land, of terrain, of habitat. And then when you see the migrations that we're seeing now, the so-called migrations, say coming across the Mediterranean, but also in the Andaman Sea, to me that is not migration. That is not a search, if you want, for better life. That is a search for bare life, the essentials of life. And behind that lies, again, a story of a loss of habitat. Now, when you have this level of buying, very quickly, just look at the yellow ones, etc. Here you see that most of it is also for biofuels, crops for biofuels, not for food. When you have this level of buying, really we're talking the transformation of what is a smallholder agriculture ground into plantations. You are expelling floras, faunas, and people of all sorts. Where do those people go? They go to cities. City is the last place where there is enough of public space or unmarked space that they can be there. So when I hear politicians talk, everybody wants to live in a city, no. Millions are expelled from their habitat and have to go to cities. Now, the larger picture behind that is one of growing stretches of dead land and dead water. You know what I'm talking about, right? We don't even, and in its full materiality, that stuff becomes invisible. We don't even think about that. Well, that means, and so here I have some graphs, that more and more ground is no longer available the way we have used it to grow food, etc., etc. The Midwest, for instance, which thinks itself the Midwest in the United States, the what is it, the breadbasket of the world, something like that, very grandiose at any rate. Well, it still looked very green on the surface, all those pesticides and fertilizers, man. But the earth is getting hotter and hotter. It's dying. Not all of it, but big patches. So here is, okay, no, there was not. So what we are talking, when we talk about cities, we're talking about much more than just somehow a particular kind of space. We're talking about a zone, a terrain, a ground that is going to become one of the few grounds where those who have nothing, those who are losing their habitat, are going to be coming. So when I juxtapose these various trends, including this privatizing of big, patches of urban land, which used to be more urban tissue, I think we face major challenges. Now, I juxtapose all these negatives with, and I realize I don't have time, as I already knew, to develop it, that the city is also a critical space where we can deploy a variety of forms of scientific knowledge to address the environmental crises, etc. It is a place where those without power can make a history, can make a stand, can make claims, etc., etc. But I do think that we are confronting an era that I would say is quite different, where the history of the urban is quite different. When you add to that also the wars, quite different from what we were seeing, say, after World War II. And I urge those who are working on cities to, at least peripherally, keep these emerging limitations in mind when we speak about cities. Thank you very much.